Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Well, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. The fourth candle has been lit. We are well on our way, right? Advent 4. In the midst of darkness, there is a light approaching. There is love approaching. There is truth approaching. It's standing still a little far off, waiting for the invitation that it can enter our midst. Our gospel reading for this morning tells the story of Joseph's challenge, whether or not to invite Christ into this life, whether or not to invite Christ into his life and into the world. Joseph was an upright, honorable man, a devout and righteous Jew. He was probably much admired and respected in the community. And it was his choice whether to snuff it out, this life, this light. Now think of Joseph. Joseph must have had expectations for how his life would play out. Scholars believe that he was an older man, and he was about to take a very young wife, a young bride. And the match wouldn't have been made on a whim. It would have been carefully thought out by both families. And the expectations everyone had, God willing, included an honorable wedded life. In due course, many children, maturing as the years went by. And God willing, Mary and Joseph would be blessed and overjoyed to see their grandchildren, the continuation of that sacred lineage that the author of Matthew's Gospel tells us at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, that traced back through the house of David all the way back through to Abraham. Instead, what a mess. Right? What a mess Joseph finds himself in. And can you imagine the absolute panic-inducing conversation he and Mary had? Or more likely, it was probably the conversation between Joseph and Mary's father that transpired as they wept and tore their garments. And the worst case scenarios, actually the only scenario open to them as law-abiding Jews that must have run through Joseph's mind and Mary's father's mind and Mary's mind as the embryo, this light, this situation first appeared on the scene. The only way to proceed would be to snuff it out. Carry on with the status quo. And what was the status quo of the day, in that day of the people of Israel? We read in Deuteronomy 22:23. And this is what would have been presented to Joseph and to Mary. If there is a young woman, a virgin already engaged to be married, and a man meets her in the town and lies with her, you shall bring both of them to the gate of that town and stone them to death. The young woman because she did not cry out in the town, and the man because he violated his neighbor's wife. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. That was the only option. Instead, Joseph makes a heretical decision. I will not have Mary taken to the outskirts of town and stoned to death. I will send her away quietly. I'll divorce her quietly. There will still be some shame, but in time, perhaps her family should move away. The incident will be forgotten. We will carry on. Joseph's heretical act is the first act of invitation to the light that is being offered to pierce the darkness of this world. But just when he had resolved to do this, the story tells us, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. And we tend to read this passage fairly quickly. We tend to rush over it. It is short, right? And it's boom, 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 up to Mary's birth, the birth of Jesus. But we don't get to really ruminate enough. And we often miss the gravitas or the weight of what is presented to Joseph and what Joseph experiences. I think the passage understates his suffering. Joseph must have gone to a deep, dark place of soul searching. And how long did it take for Joseph to make this decision? How long did it take for Joseph to muster up the courage to be a heretic, to act outside of the norm? However long, an hour or two, days, weeks, or sleepless nights, this was a deep inner shift in Joseph. And finally, he decides to make a radical act of invitation. And in so doing, deciding not to snuff out a life, two lives, the baby inside of Mary and Mary. In deciding not to snuff out those lives, he is given reassurance from God. And yet another opportunity to invite this life to shine a little brighter. The Lord appears to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, take heart. Remember who you are, son of David. Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. For the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit." Joseph. He wakes up from his dream. I think he must have wrestled against the gut-wrenching, panic-inducing fear, words swirling in his head. Not only now, what do I do now? Mary has brought shame on our family, according to everybody else's opinion. And now everyone's going to think I'm a crazy man. And more shame will be heaped upon our household. But Joseph continues to invite this light into the mess. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. Can you imagine the last few months of waiting for this child to be born, what that was like? For both families, for Mary and Joseph. Did everybody have an open heart to this invitation? Was everybody on board? I think probably Mary's family was, right? Given the option. They were probably grateful, but still doubt, shame, guilt, judgment must have plagued them on a daily basis. But at least Mary and Joseph, for them there was a light shining in their hearts and their minds that must have outshone all the lies, the accusations that gnattered at them those 9 months. They had a promise from God that illumined their path getting brighter each step of their way towards Bethlehem. Now, there's no possible way Joseph could first have tidied up this situation. Right? Often, we had a party in our home Friday night, and we had to tidy up. Not too much, though, right? You don't want to wash the floors because that's kind of a lost labor when you're having people over. But when we had company coming, we vacuumed and we stuffed stuff in closets and under the bed, and we took things down to the laundry room so the messiness wouldn't be seen. Because when we invite people into our lives, into our homes, we want to be admired, right? At least accepted, at least not judged. Perhaps Joseph was feeling the same way. God was coming into his life. Perhaps he could somehow fix it up. But no, he finds himself wandering to Bethlehem, not even being able to find a place to stay. Any attempts to tidy things up, even just a little, to present himself as a good Jew. But if he'd been able to tidy this messy situation up even just a little bit, it wouldn't have allowed for God's power and might to be manifest. It would not have given Joseph the opportunity to partner with God in bringing a kind of love into the world that heals a multitude of pain and hurt. And we wouldn't have had the opportunity to understand just how heretical that love of God is. To understand that God's love was and is and will be present in the darkest, messiest of situations. So for the next couple of days, I think we have 2 days left to tidy up our homes, having sent out invitations for guests. Perhaps you're kind of lucky and you've been invited somewhere else, right? So you don't have to tidy up. You just have to bring a casserole dish. But there's still a lot of rushing around that's going to happen in these next 2 days. And instead of racing around, instead of joining in on the pre-Christmas race to the finish that is commanded by this culture of consumerism that we live in, and driven by that deep need to be accepted and keep up with family tradition or the Joneses, I challenge you to take a different route to Christmas in these 2 remaining days. Can you make these last few days a time of deep prayer and reflection? And reflect on what is the mess that you see in your life or in your internal world. Can you put a finger on what it is that haunts you, that has dashed your expectations of a peaceful, joyful life? Perhaps it is a relationship that's not right. Perhaps there are family dynamics that you wonder how they got so out of balance. Or perhaps you are simply just overwhelmed with the clutter of worry, or consumer gluttony, or pride that leaves no room for meaning or joy this season. Can you be truly open, willing, receptive, truly welcoming of this light into these places? And if you're not a person of prayer, can you take a few moments? Can you go for a walk? Or at least stop for a few moments and ask yourself, what is the mess? What's the harm of inviting God into this mess? God wants to come in. Jesus wants to be born in you. So all you need to do is simply say, God, come in to all of me. And you might be saying, Michelle, now, really, what do you mean by letting God in? And all the stuff about the light of Christ getting brighter. And Christ wanting to be born in me. What do you really mean? And in concrete terms, I think it's going to look different for each and every one of us. But know that your spiritual ancestor Joseph modeled for you, modeled for us, choosing mercy, choosing to restrain from retaliation in the form of nonviolence and forgiveness. He chose to look like a fool in the eyes of others in order to follow the path of compassion for another. And like Joseph, we must choose whether or not to invite God and his goodness and mercy into the midst of what life hurls at us. And then allow creativity to forge a new path, a new way of holy being in the midst of it all. My fourth candle lighter. I'm going to ask my fourth candle lighter. This week, may we, by God's grace, enter that untidy heart space. As we survey the mess, may we let God in to see us as we are. Not masked by new decor, not stuffing piles under the bed, not putting on the masks of being all put together. May we invite God into the honest messiness of our hearts. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you bring a light into our lives that shines brighter and brighter, and with each day continues to shine. We ask, Lord, for courage to allow you to enter the darkest parts and bring healing, wholeness, and joy. Amen.
Amen.